All right, what's up, guys? My name is Kipp. Most of you who are going to watch this video probably already know me, but I'm here today to make a sort of fun, potentially long video about the Super Metroid Randomizer settings tier list that I have created, and these are based on our currently raced settings for competitive balance. Obviously, we have League, Randomizer League Season 4 about to start, I think, in January, and you know, I thought, what can I do to give back to the community? And I thought, well, tomorrow is Thanksgiving for those of us in the United States. I think everybody's always looking for a super controversial topic to talk about with, you know, your Uncle Billy at the table. And so while Super Metroid Randomizer settings tier list from none other than Kipp is probably going to be pretty high on the list of controversial topics, I also thought, well, this is probably a little safer than talking about, you know, the recent elections or other things that you might not want to talk about. So if you find yourself at Thanksgiving dinner at some point within the next few days and the conversation with your family seems to be going a little bit awry, just bring this video up and I promise you, you'll have hours of discussion that will be relatively tame and no one will say anything that's overly offensive. At least I hope. All right, so with that said, let's kind of jump into kind of why I'm doing this. Obviously, I am not a tournament organizer for, you know, the league. I am simply a person who enjoys being in the league and racing. And as most people who hang out with me or watch my channel or listen to my interviews during competition know, I'm a competition junkie. I love the racing in particular. I think I could argue that Rando has kind of become my sort of primary focus over the last few years. So I've also had, you know, a decent bit of success in terms of my performance in the tournaments and leagues. And so what I'm most interested in legitimately is not necessarily about my personal win percentage. What I'm more interested in is, are we putting together modes and combination that are, you know, fun, but like as competitively balanced as possible. That's my big focus. So what I'm gonna do today, just to have a little bit of fun and maybe hopefully generate some discussion, is I'm gonna show you guys, I'm gonna walk you through, first of all, my credentials, just to kind of, I like to be transparent with people about, hey, you know, if I'm about to advocate for certain things, I want you to be aware of where I'm coming from and why, so that people don't, you know, hopefully they don't feel like I am advocating for things that I think are just good for me from a competitive point of view. So I'm gonna walk you through that, and then we're gonna talk about my tier list. I've got some caveats to go through, but then I have 3 proposals that I would like to make for what I would like to see added to our list of competition, I guess in terms of settings. And these are kind of things that don't currently exist that I think would make our situation even more competitive and even more fun. So let's start. And again, I'll say up front, the production value on this video is gonna be very low. I'm not gonna go back and edit anything. I'm just gonna talk off the cuff, and I've got some slides here to share. All right, so let's start real quick with my resume, okay? So for the past 3+ years, basically from League Season 2 until now, Randomizer has been my primary focus. You have to excuse me, I'm sick. So my overall record in Randomizer races over the past, you know, 3+ years is 66-18, which is almost 80%. And then my match record, which I consider my match record, you know, in best of 3 matches, is actually 19-3. And I didn't realize this until I put this slide together, but all 3 of the losses there are from one player, Asdr. So I've been in 7 tournaments. I've won the championship in 4 of them. I've made the grand finals in 6 out of the 7. And I've at minimum made the semifinals in all 7. Ironically, the only one that I didn't make the finals in was the Dash tournament from SG Live 2020. And for those of you that know me, I'm the one who primarily designed Dash, so that's kind of funny. But my record versus finals participants, if you look at how I play against the people who've made the finals in all 7 of these tournaments, my lifetime record against these people is, I think, 27-13. I think there's some caveat in there, like, I think if you add up 13 plus 6, you don't end up with 18, but it's because I took a loss to Asdr and Bunny, and that counted as 2 losses in the multi-category tournament, or excuse me, in the multi-world tournament. But my record against literally everybody else that hasn't made a finals in those 7 tournaments, 39-6. So, you know, I just want full transparency on where I'm coming from and what I think, you know, works. let's talk about the tournaments and leagues, okay? You can see the individual breakdown. I'm not gonna sit here and kind of harp on this, but you can kind of see a breakdown of how I've done over multiple different tournaments, not only in terms of my record, but also the matches and sort of where I finished. So, you know, if you want to read any of that, you can pause the video. Let's go to my record by mode. This is probably the most important part relative to what I'm going to assert for what I think are the good, you know, settings and what aren't. But basically, I don't really have an agenda anywhere, and hopefully you'll see that as I sort of explain some things. But you can see that there are some settings that I've performed better than others. It just kind of depends. In particular, I'd like to point out that I'm a huge fan of area rando. And you can see that in the area location, I've got, you know, more losses than maybe some of the other sections. I've probably lost more, even if you go back to my tournament performances. Like, look at our most recent Super Metroid Randomizer multi-category tournament right here. I actually had more losses in that tournament than any tournament of the past 3.5 years, and yet I actually believe I'm the one that designed this one for the most part, and I think it's our best representation of what the skill set is. So I'm not interested in advocating for things that are going to increase my win percentage necessarily. I'm interested in advocating for things that are going to legitimately bring challenge to the table, but the healthy kind of balanced challenge that we need to keep moving Randomizer forward and keeping it competitive. So let's jump in straight to the Super Metroid Randomizer tier list that I've created. And I have some caveats, just so I can save myself from having to repeat the same thing like 100 times over the course of the video. One of the biggest caveats that I want to make up front is this. It doesn't really matter where I put a setting on the tier list. That does not mean that I'm talking smack about the setting itself. It doesn't mean that I'm talking smack about the people that created it. It doesn't mean that I don't think it has value. In fact, I think every single randomizer that's been created is actually really cool. I'm a big fan of creativity. I'm a big fan of people trying stuff and just being, you know, coming up with creative solutions to different problems that you could have in the game. So I don't have a problem with any of that, and I think it's really great. But even if something is really low, I have a lot of respect for what it took to create it. I just don't think it races very well, and I don't think it's very balanced for racing and competitive purposes. Clearly, what I think we should be rewarding in Super Metroid Randomizer is skill, and I don't just mean like micro skill. I also mean your ability to analyze things and make, you know, adjustments on the fly, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I want to make sure that I'm promoting and hopefully encouraging us to race modes that have that in abundance, as opposed to just a bunch of coin flips where somebody wins and somebody loses based on making a decision that has very little information involved, okay? So with that said, let's show the tier list, and I'm going to talk with you guys about it just a little bit here, okay? I'm just gonna go down the list and kind of explain myself. So S tier, what do I think are the absolute best settings that we currently have in our competitive modes? Number one, area randomization. I want to give a big tip of the hat to the guys at the various sites that have come up with a way to do full area randomization. That's where you have the 32 portals. They connect to different other portals in the game. There is no necessarily like light area, for example, has like a certain way that it works. Full area, it can be any of the portals as long as the logic behind it can work. I think this is the single best thing that has happened to Super Metroid Randomizer. It's led to, I think, a renaissance in terms of interest in the game. The game is way better with it. You have to think more. Back in the day when I just did vanilla map all the time with like major minor, like I literally basically made most of my decisions before the race even started, and then I just played and didn't have to turn my brain on very much during the race. Here, with area randomization, you have to think all the time. It's wonderful. I can't say enough good things about it. I think it is the single greatest thing we have going right now. Secondly, let's talk about this. This might come as a surprise. I actually feel like vanilla bosses is also S tier. Now, I know that I'm probably gonna get some pushback on this because a lot of people are like, yeah, but the boss shuffle, That's what makes it interesting, because you just don't know, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not down on boss shuffle. I think it's really cool, and it brings something interesting to the table. What I'm getting at, though, is in particular with area randomization in effect, I think vanilla bosses is ultimately the better choice for competitive balance, because you at least know what you're getting into prior, and you have to plan around it. Meaning, you don't get a free Lower North Fair hell run knowing that Fantoon's down there, or Kraid, where you might even get like an energy tank or something. So you don't have that buffer. You have to plan your Lower North Fair hell runs a lot more. You also can't get in a weird spot with Dragon. Secondly, the way Boss Shuffle works, again, I like it, but there are certain things about it that make it like very, very, very boom or bust. And people can make really hyper-aggressive choices with very little information, and if they're rewarded, it can be game-breaking. Which, you know, you could argue is a good or a bad thing. I don't think in the long term that's the healthiest thing. Yes, it's randomizer. Yes, you got to take chances, but I don't think people should be like pulling a roulette wheel or a roulette lever every time. So I think Vanilla Boss is S tier in terms of it lets you plan certain things in advance. And for example, I also hate it when like you have to go down to Fantoon, kill Fantoon in Lower North Fair, only to return direct ship later. Like, it's really complicated, and there's some issues with it. However, I will say this, later on, one of my proposals will address this in a way. I think there's a way to get Boss Shuffle in, but still make it more compelling. So those to me are the two best things, settings-wise. I think area randomization, and in particular with vanilla bosses, both S tier. All right, let's jump down to A tier. Just so I'm clear real quick, major minor split, Chozo split, full countdown split. Basically, I just want to point out that I think all of our sort of right now common item splits, they're all great. They're all solid, and I think they interface with a bunch of different other settings in a positive way. I put them in this order because I still think major minor is kind of king, although I do think major minor could use some slight adjustments for where some of the items are that might make it a little more balanced. I am a huge fan of Chozo. I know Chozo is one of those settings that some people think is a little more straightforward, but I'm telling y'all straight up, I think the most interesting combination of settings that we're currently running might actually be Chozo item split, full area randomization with vanilla bosses. This is the same setting combination that we ran in our most recent SG Live tournament a few weeks ago. And basically, I think I ran 7 total races in the tournament. 5 of them, admittedly, were just not overly competitive. 2 of them were extremely competitive, and I actually even lost one of them, and the other one I won by like less than a minute. They were both the Chozo one with full area randomization vanilla bosses. I'm telling you, I could sit here and do like 10 minutes on explaining why I believe that it's actually one of the best combinations to race in terms of game theory and stuff. There's just a lot of different ways that area randomization interfaces with Chozo, and it's fantastic. I really wish that I had realized this in time for the Super Metroid Randomizer multi-category tournament that we had over the summer. But, you know, I was trying a bunch of different combinations, and I think that one is literally one of our best combinations. So the only other thing I'll say about Full Countdown is I love Full Countdown. I never really liked Full, but I really like Countdown. I think it greatly increases the ability to make race impacting choices. You can take certain types of risks, but you're making informed decisions. Like, I could go on and on. I think Full Countdown is a fantastic thing that the Varia guys have added, and I'm a huge fan of it. I have a star by it because I have a suggestion for something that I think would make it better that I'll talk about later. Number 4, co-op. I think co-op is A tier. I haven't done a ton of co-op, but I really wish in some way that the league would do more of it this year. And I don't just mean like 1 or 2 weeks. Like, here's my suggestion, my overall suggestion for league this year. If you want to keep it 3 players, that's fine. 3 is pretty fun, but I also in some way kind of feel like teams of 2 might be in some ways even more compelling, because you could have every week, you could have the individual races, but then you could also have co-op like certain weeks, and you could even have co-op in the playoffs. in some ways, I feel like the playoff needs to mirror what you test in the regular season, which is why we set up our multi-category tournament to be that way. But if you look at it this way, if you had 2 people on a team and you wanted to do a best out of 5, which I think is great, by the way, I love the best out of 5 format, you could have each person race 1 time individually, games 1 and 2, and then games 3 through 5 could all be co-op. That would really, in my opinion, allow teams to spend a lot of time practicing and like coming up with, you know, good methodology for how they want to approach things. But then you could do them with all these different combinations of settings that we play with currently, and every one of them is going to be very, very different. So I'm a big fan of co-op, think it's great. Let's talk about B tier, and for the record, I want to go ahead and point something out. B tier, like, it's in the middle, but I don't mean this like it's bad at all. In fact, I even think C tier is fine. I don't think it's great, but I think it's fine. D tier is the only one where I feel like, yeah, you know, this is just stuff I really would prefer not to do at all. So B tier is still very good. Let's start with multi-world. Big fan of the multi-world tournament that we had at the beginning of this year. Really like the way that it can be raced. I think major minor split multi-world is way better than full, mainly just because I think regular full is kind of trashy. If there was a full countdown multi-world, I would be in huge favor of it. I would love it, okay? But as most people know, the multi-world stuff isn't run by the same people as the various stuff, so sometimes there's not as much crossover, and I don't know enough about the tech to get into all that, but multi-world major minor split I think is fantastic. Really had a lot of fun. Think it's great. The only thing I would change, though, I've got a little star here, is, and I might talk about this on a later slide, but I really wish that they could go back in and code it to where, for example, all of player 1's items had like a blue tint, and all of player 2 items had like a red tint, and then that way to the colorization. So that way when you're playing, let's say you see, you know, an item from a distance, or you see an item that you know you can't collect at this moment or whatever, and let's say it's various suit, well, you at least know whose various suit it is, and then you can make adjustments. I also like the idea of knowing what color is which, because you could then make more strategic decisions about when to pick up E-tanks to help with hell running and stuff like that. So again, it might in some ways make the seeds slightly easier, but I think in a good way. Not easier like, oh, it's free, but easier in terms of you get to make game impacting decisions and choices based on small amounts of information. I think that's the direction that Super Metroid Randomizer benefits the most from, okay? So anyway, multi-world major minor split, really like it a lot. Just wish that they could make that change to the colorization so we can make better decisions. Number 2, Dash. As you guys know, I'm sort of the primary brain, you know, I guess Dash is sort of my primary brainchild. I don't have anything overly bad or great to say about Dash. The primary goal of Dash was to take our original major minor vanilla map stuff, rebalance some of the items, and make it to where basically you could probably finish the game in a variety of ways and still be competitive. And I'm just gonna say this, I do think that I achieved that with where Dash currently is. If you look at a ton of the Dash races over the last league and some of our other tournaments, the races have been very good. The races have been good. So even though I'm not a super huge fan of vanilla map, major minor racing as much anymore, I still think Dash serves a good purpose, and I'd love to see, you know, more stuff put into Dash. I will say this, small caveat in the middle for like maybe the 2 or 3 people that make it this deep into the video. I want to do some more work with some Dash modes just because I want to like toy around with different ideas of balance. Doesn't even necessarily mean that these things would ever show up in any kind of live version, but the simple reality is this. My best friend, you know, one of my best friends in the world, Mass, he's the primary person responsible for helping me put together a lot of this stuff. I would love if more people out there that knew how to code and knew how to work on this kind of stuff would be willing to volunteer to work with us. I just don't have the technical expertise, but I do have the vision, so I just need some people who are willing to spend a little bit of their time investing in, you know, updating some things in Dash or even trying some stuff. So if there's anybody out there who is legitimately interested in working with me and Mass on some of this stuff, you know, please feel free to DM me. I'm being very serious. I'm looking for people who would be interested in that. All right, number 3 in the B tier, light area randomization. So here's the deal. I like area way better than vanilla, so I like light area better than vanilla map. The only problem with light is, and it's going to be difficult to explain this very quickly, but the positions and the situations that light can put you in based on the restrictions that it has on the portals actually still make for it to be a relatively boom or bust setting. And one of the biggest problems is that this setting in combination, in particular with ball shuffle, gets really, really crazy. So let me put it to you this way. I really like what the Varia devs have done in terms of having a light area rando mode. I wish there was something in between light area and regular area. I wish there was some kind of in between that had some restrictions, but not the same type of restrictions that light area currently has. Again, I would race light area over vanilla, but there are certain ways that the portals are set up that really put the runners in coin flip situations. And some of those I think are a little more extreme in terms of not being overly healthy for racing. All right, number 4, bosses shuffled. Same thing as I said earlier. I really like bosses shuffled. There's a really cool element to it. However, how it works in combination with some of the other settings can get a bit wonky. I'm just going to leave it there. I think it's good. I think it's good that that's on the table. But I think there's some things we could do to maybe shift it a bit to make it a little bit stronger of a setting. Number 5, random start with full countdown split. I put a star by this one because we had certain random starts that we took out of the equation. I like random start. I think it's cool, but to a certain degree, some of the starting locations force the game to be played in a certain way. Like if you start in Lower Norfair, you have to immediately get Various Suit. And then there are other things like in Lower Norfair where you either get Screw Attack, I think Spazer or Ice Beam, or maybe even Plasma. Some of that to me is a little wonky because then you got to sit there and shoot the Key Hunters like a million times. Random start is a really cool idea. I think it's got a lot of potential in certain spots, but I kind of feel like we need to revisit the balance of each particular starting place. All right, let's go to C tier, vanilla map. Again, I don't hate vanilla map, but I just think it's pretty generic. And I've mentioned before that the vanilla map makes the game theory a lot more straightforward. And I'm just going to say it. I know there's going to be people out there that might agree or disagree or push back on this, but I think vanilla map is the easiest one to exploit if you have a speedrunning background. And I am someone who has a speedrunning background in terms of if you took the top 15 to 20 competitive players on the rando scene, I'm going to be one of the people that has a little bit more vanilla speedrunning experience than the field. And so vanilla map, in a lot of ways, I think actually helps me versus a lot of opponents. But I don't think it's very compelling, and I don't really like playing it that way because I just shut my brain off for a decent amount of the run. Number 2, multi-world with full split. I really like multi-world, but regular full split, I really dislike. And I just feel like, to a certain degree, what you're allowed to do with some of the game theory with your teammate is, I'm just going to say it, it's a little elementary. I don't think you have to think that hard about how to approach multi-world full split. It just is what it is. All right, number 3, route rando. So last year we did route rando during one of the weeks of the league season. It was pretty fun because you played in a different way. However, this was very close to D tier for me. I would never want to have this as like let's put it this way. If I was going to be in a route rando tournament, I'd just rather be in a route rando tournament where that was all that was happening, and maybe it would be a small tournament and I just focused on that for a while, whatever. But there's too many coin flip situations. On top of that, there's too much stuff that doesn't really fit like normal Super Metroid play. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a cool concept, like I said before, but I don't think it races very well. And on top of that, it doesn't make sense to me to put it in a regular season of the league and then not have it in the playoffs, so I'd rather just not see it. And then let's talk about D tier. I just don't really like the full split, the old full split without countdown. I could go on and on. it's just not very fun. It's not very compelling, and you don't have to think very hard about it. Sorry. And then number 2, I know people have been talking about doing open mode. I've tested a few open mode seeds. I also did some extensive theory crafting in advance, thinking about all the different things that could go into it before I tried any. And let me just put it to you this way. I really try to be open-minded about things. In fact, my number 1 S tier thing is area randomization. And I'll admit to you that my first 1 or 2 seeds, I actually hated it and didn't get it and didn't like it. Now I think it's the best thing there is. So I definitely approached open mode with an open mind. I was like, okay, I need to have an open mind about this. Maybe I'll end up liking it after I do some seeds. Basically what I came to a conclusion about was, I think there's a reason that it hasn't really shown up in many tournaments up to now, if any. Number 2, I would really prefer not to see it, whether it's co-op or not. I think open mode is, in terms of racing, kind of a waste of time. There's too many weird coin flip, huge, sort of spiky situations it can put you in, where if you do one thing, then you beat the other guy by 3 minutes, and if you do another thing, you lose by 5 minutes. It's just one of those things where I don't think it's overly good for racing. And even though I respect the work that went into making it in terms of the geography and stuff, playing without Morph Ball just isn't very fun, and I don't think it's very compelling. It's a mode that's different just to be different, and I think it's neat that it exists. It is like, of all the current options, it is the last thing I would want to see in League. And in particular, if it was in the playoffs, I think that would just be a tragedy. Okay, if you want to have open mode, I kind of feel like you should just have an open mode tournament and let the people that like it play it, and just deal with the consequences of how wild it is. But yeah, that's the tier list. So let's get into my proposals real quick. I have 3 proposals, and I need everybody to hear me out. I think these 3 proposals would actually, they're not meant to replace anything, so I don't want to get rid of anything necessarily. I just want to propose a few slight alterations for how we could approach some of these mode combinations that I think would make it way more interesting and way more fun and way better for racing. I think being better for racing is the key here. All right, so proposal number 1, I'd like to see a full countdown UI change. Okay, the current full countdown only shows major items. As you can see up here, it says criteria, and then it's got 2. You know that there are 2 major items. Something that Mass and I discussed that we went ahead and implemented in Dash, but we haven't released it or anything, is I really think it would be way, way better if the UI showed not only how many major items were in a location, but also the remaining E-tanks that are in a location. So as you can see, what Dash did is, and you can nitpick whether you like our choice or not on the UI. We decided to take away the map because the map is very, like, I can't even ever remember using the map really. I know some people have come back and told me later that they would hate it without the map and all this jazz. That's fine, whatever. But anybody who's acting like the map is like one of the most critical things that you study in every run, it's just not. Flat out, it's just not. Okay, none of the extremely upper tier, super competitive players are constantly reading their map the entire run for all of their competitive races. But what we did is we made the blue number the number of major items, just like regular countdown, full countdown, and then we made the pink number the number of E-tanks. I really feel like putting the number of E-tanks, having that information available, really adds more good information that the player can use to decide how much more am I willing to clear through this section. I'd like to point out that full countdown doesn't have a lot of lower Norfair hell runs. I think this might actually put that a little bit more on the table. And so anyway, I could go on and on about how much I feel like this is kind of a major thing that would be really healthy. But yeah, full countdown UI, putting in the pink number. I don't care how they do it on the original. If they wanted to make the words criteria up there a little bit smaller and then have, like, you know, 2 sets of numbers, it doesn't matter to me. I just feel like the information would be great, okay? All right, proposal number 2. I would, and let me also remind everybody, I don't know how to code any of this stuff, and I don't really know exactly what we'd have to do to make it logically balanced, right? I'm sure it would take a lot of work. But just in theory, if this stuff could exist, imagine this real quick, okay? So I've got 3 proposals relative to this. So the first thing is I would like to include the boss locations on the start screen. Yes. During boss shuffle, I would like, at minimum, either on the start screen or maybe when you press start on a menu in the game. I want the game, even during boss shuffle, to tell me where the 4 bosses are in advance. Now, before anybody says, well, that defeats the purpose. No, it doesn't. It actually makes it more interesting because you now have more information up front and you can game theory your run around knowing where the bosses are. So it's like, it removes some of the roulette wheel, kind of crazy all-in poker gambles, but it lets you have more information that then you can sort of game plan around. And I'll explain even more in a minute about why I think that's critical, excuse me. So let's talk about, though, I also would like to see a new idea implemented if possible. Right now, bosses shuffled. Currently, that means all four bosses are shuffled with at most 2 in vanilla locations. And the possible adjustment for rebalance that I would suggest is this. Boss locations control Wreck Ship and Kraid's E-Tank activation, and I guess even Meridia, not the individual bosses themselves. To a certain degree, right now, like I mentioned earlier, if Phantoon's in Lower Norfair, you have to kill Phantoon there before you can open up the Wreck Ship. I think it'd be kind of cool if Ridley was at Wreck Ship, but you found a way to kill him, that opened up Wreck Ship. So I won't go into all the details about all the cool things that could bring to the table, but I do think that that is a way that it could be done. I'm not suggesting it should be the default way. I'm just saying that I feel like that being an option would be great. But now let's talk about actual bosses randomized. This is sort of a new idea. I have a feeling that this has probably been played with before by other people. It might even be an option that's already on the various site and I just don't know about it, but I'm just pitching this because I thought it would be interesting. All 4 boss locations can be any of the 4 major bosses with no cap on the number of times an individual boss can be used. Obviously, this would require potential tweaks to logic to ensure the minimum conditions aren't too overwhelming. For example, if it's 4 Ridleys, which would be really fascinating, the logic would have to account for that early, right? You'd have to have enough availability in terms of firepower and protection and stuff to be able to kill them. But anyway, I feel like this would be great. I also feel like this works well if you get the information up front and knowing what it is, because then you game plan around it. All right, proposal number 3, area randomization portals locations available on map screen or an additional menu screen at all times. This is very similar to knowing the bosses up front. Let me give a quick example. Again, I'm not saying that we should replace our current area randomization where you gotta go test the portals for yourself. I'm saying an additional way to play would be for both players to know the exact map layout in advance, even though it's randomized. It would be so freaking cool. It would put so many more interesting plays on the table in terms of taking water dips into Meridia or going to the crab location, knowing that if you knew what the map layout was, you would do it knowing that you could go there without being, trapped or something like that. Like, there's all kinds of different positive ways this could impact people's play and put more diversity on the table. Now, let me give a quick example. What you're looking at right here is, I don't think this is the most modern version, but I haven't looked at the most modern one that Mass released. This was an area tracker that Mass and I basically developed. Basically, this is like my idea. I came up with this idea because I was having a really hard time reading the area map tracker. So instead, it's just a bunch of lists of room names, but it's color-coded. And so when I'm playing, sometimes I don't even pay attention to the room names or the portal names. I'm just looking at color schemes, and it helps me put together the information a lot faster as I'm deciding how to route, okay? Now, right now, this is how it comes at the beginning, and you just click stuff, for example, and then over the course of a run, it might end up looking like this. Like if this were the layout, by the end of the run, you can basically see on the left what the original rooms are and then what they connect to, etc. Okay? So, what I'm basically suggesting is, I'm not necessarily saying it has to look exactly like this, but something like this on an in-game menu, where at the very beginning you could go in and track the entire map, and spend the entire run knowing how everything connected and then like making routing decisions off of that would be so cosmic brain awesome, okay? And let me try to explain something real quick. Let's talk about, you know, before people were like, oh, well, that destroys what, you know, area randomization is. You shouldn't do it that way. That's not cool, right? Instead, not knowing where the portals goes is way more interesting. I'm going to push back on that, okay? Let's talk about what is our mission representation? Like, what is Samus being asked to do in a randomizer originally? So what is the mission? It's to defeat Mother Brain. Before you go into it and assume you're a veteran player, do you know the map? If you're just playing a old, regular 2017 major minor split rando, do you know the map before you get on the planet? You do. You know where every door connects to. Do you know the bosses? Do you know which 4 bosses that you're fighting? You do. You know that it's Kraid, you know that it's Phantoon, you know that it's Dragon, you know that it's Ridley. Do you even know where the boss locations are? You do. You know where Kraid is going to be, you know where Phantoon is going to be, etc. What's the only thing that you don't know? You just don't know where the item locations are, and depending on where the item locations are, or excuse me, you know where the item locations are, you just don't know what items are there, right? So you're not really sure where they are. That changes how you play the seed, okay? So let's now go to our current model, like SG Live 2021, and it was also game 3 of our most current SG Live 2022. If we were doing a major minor split with full area and bosses shuffled, how does that compare to our old model? What's the mission? It's the same. It's to defeat Mother Brain. Do you know the map? No, not only is it shuffled, but you don't know what it is. Do you know what 4 bosses you're fighting? You still do know that. Do you know where the boss locations are? You don't. Do you know where the item locations are? You don't. In other words, look how much is different between those two things, and how, and particularly a lot of you out there that have a lot of experience doing this, y'all know how much all that unknown information affects the game theory. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. Some of it affects the game theory in a good way, some of it in a way that's like a little boom or bust, okay? So my suggestion is this. If we had a setting where if you wanted to know the boss locations in advance and you could see it, and you wanted to know the portal locations in advance and you could see it, it would add a legitimately different way to play that is in between kind of our old school model versus our new school model, that I think might actually end up being the most compelling, with the most, like, good decisions are going to be rewarded in this format more than any format that currently exists. So look at it this way. If we updated it to what I'm proposing, we would have a major minor split with area randomization and bosses shuffled. You would still have the same mission. The map would be shuffled, but it would be known to you. In other words, you could know it at the very beginning of the run. The bosses, you would know all 4, where they, you know, what they were. You would also know where they were, and you'd have to game plan around that. The only thing you still wouldn't know is the item location. So to me, this would be sort of the marriage of the two things, and let you end up legitimately making a bunch of choices along the way in terms of routing and what order to kill the bosses in, etc., in conjunction with not knowing the items. I don't think this will make it free. In fact, and I'm just going to be frank with you, I actually feel like this mode, if it was implemented right today, I don't think I would be one of the best ones at it immediately, because it's a different skill set, and it would be one I would have to practice a lot, but I think it would be really compelling, and I think it would be really healthy. So yeah, there's that. So all I'll say at this point is this video went a lot longer than I anticipated, but at the same time, I talk a lot. So this was close to a 40-minute video. At this point, I'm really just making this video to generate some discussion. I wanted to get my thoughts out there, not only in terms of what I think the tier list should be, but also some of my proposals. So, you know, obviously I don't have the tech knowledge to be able to create some of this stuff. I don't even know if some of this stuff can even be done or how complicated it would be. But I'm a big fan of our randomizer scene, big fan of our tournaments. Would love to see it continue to evolve in a really positive, competitive direction. So these are my thoughts. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you watched most of it. Feel free to, agree with me on some things. Feel free to push back. I love the discussion. If you see me streaming, come talk to me about it. Drop some information in the Discord. But yeah, this is good just to generate some Thanksgiving discussion. And I hope everybody out there enjoys your holiday. And if you don't live in the United States and aren't celebrating Thanksgiving, then I hope you enjoy whatever your Thanksgiving or other holidays are. I will see you guys later. See you next mission.